Kia ora koutou and welcome to today's Thought Leadership webinar. Ko Frida Wells toka ingoa. I support the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee with Comms and Engagement. We're one of 6 regional joint committees around Aotearoa. So the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee is comprised of leaders from local and central government and iwi and mana whenua in the Wairarapa Wellington Horowhenua region. Their job is to collaborate on regional level spatial planning and economic development, whilst focusing on the areas of transport, housing, iwi capacity, and climate-related challenges. The vision statement is to positively shape our region's future, to build a place where people can live, work, and thrive. And really, when we think of what we mean by a thriving region, in terms of a systems view and of how things all connect and relate, every project is a climate project. So the world's top climate scientists and specialists who have authored the IPCC reports and other publications remind us that we have access to knowledge and wisdom that we can act on today, that we can tell future generations we acted on that wisdom to design houses, cities, transport systems, food systems that can combine resilience to climate change, disaster risk reductions, and emissions reductions, that our planetary boundaries are finite and that we can work with them. So these webinars are designed to support us to connect around these ideas. So I'm just going to hand over to Councillor Thomas Nash to welcome you.
Thanks, Frida. O ngā miho te waki a tātou, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Nau mai haere mai ki te pane matua taiao. Welcome to the Regional Council. And just to acknowledge mana whenua of this rohe, taranaki whānui ki te upoko o Tika Maui and Ngāti Toa Rangatira, tēnā koutou katoa. So yeah, thanks Frida for inviting me to say a couple of words very briefly at the beginning. Big fan of Alec and Alec's work, come across him and worked a little bit with him on a few things in the past. So yeah, really pleased to be able to open this event and to hear you talk to us this morning as well. And welcome to everybody online. I can see there's quite a few people online, so that's cool. Just to acknowledge it's quite a challenging time right now. It's always a challenging time working on climate, environment and transport and urban form and change, but it's especially challenging when some of the projects and initiatives that we've been working on as a wider community and a set of communities are now under threat from a new government which is changing direction quite radically, quite suddenly on a number of topics. And we all have to adjust to that, and just to acknowledge that that's having a sort of human impact on people. Not to say that there aren't opportunities in all of this, I think there are, and maybe we can discuss some of them today. But I think certainly for us, looking at the government policy statement on land transport, the draft that just came out this week, looking at the freshwater direction that is being signalled from the government, looking at the fast track consenting legislation that is being introduced to Parliament today, and I think will be announced today in Wellington as well. And these 3 things together, just to start, do pose, I think, some significant challenges for us in our work, and be great to talk about them at some point. Also think that local government will have a big role in responding to all of this. And I think people are looking to local government for leadership right now. And so that feels like a bit of pressure, personally. But also, again, I think we've got to take the opportunities where we can to find little things that we can win on and keep working together and keep talking. Because things do go through cycles. And this might be a bit of potentially a dip in terms of wins for environment, climate, transport, urban form, but there will be an upside soon, so we have to prepare for that too. That's it, really, from me, I think. And Frida, do you want to actually formally introduce Alec with his bio?
I will. We're going to embarrass him. I realise I just flipped the order of everything. Apologies. So I get to read from the paper today. Whilst we know that Alec Tang really needs no introduction, I think I'll quickly read his bio because it's quite impressive, and it's just a reminder of the substantial qualification and experience behind his talk today. So, block your ears, Alec. Following completion of his Master MSc Hons in Environmental Science, some roles he's held include Environmental Science at AECOM, Manager of the Environmental Knowledge Transfer Network at Oxford University, Principal Consultant and Global Technical Lead for Integrated Water Management Advisory at the Environmental Resources Management in the UK, Chief Sustainability Officer at Auckland Council, and Director of Sustainability at Kāinga. And he's now Partner of Sustainable Value here at KPMG. Without further ado, over to you, Alec.
Kia ora, Frida. Kia ora, Thomas. Kia ora koutou. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa. E mihi ana o kina mana whenua huri noa te whangarui a tara e pōneke ko Bakungao, toka maunia ko Sātoko, toka awa ko Taiping 1, toka moana ko Dang, toka iwi, no Gong ha Tune Hern Gong, no Birmingham, England, no Onihanga Tāmaki Makaurau aho. No reira ko Alec Tang toka ingoa. Kia ora, everybody. Lovely introduction, thank you. And really super excited to be here. Love to see some faces in the room and awesome to see some names online and some familiar names online. So I am going to talk for a bit. I chose a different picture today because I wanted to let the Wellingtonians know that we can also do water in Tāmaki Makaurau and beautiful water. So this is a shot from outside our offices up in Auckland. As the title of the presentation highlights, Frida and I have been talking for ages, right? Ages and ages and ages about, coming to one of these sessions and trying to share some insights from that experience that Frida's talked to. And what I thought might be useful is obviously driving transformation, change, but hopefully think about enduring change, which is the important thing that we've got to try and do. So I'm hoping to talk for maybe 30, 40 minutes and then have a bit of time for questions, which would be good. And the structure is what I want to do is give you a little bit of background. So like I said, lots of familiar faces. Some of you may not know why I've come to do the stuff that I've done, which I think is really important. And I'm talking to you all, and my point of assumption is that you're all in roles that are trying to affect change. And so how can I help you with that change through some of the insights that I've learned? So I want to give you a little bit of background, a bit of context. I want to talk a little bit about the current state of play. And interestingly, I see Jace, Kate from Kantar's online. We're going to talk about a little bit of work that we've done with Kantar. And then I just want to give you a few thoughts on driving sustainability and some, insights that I've picked up over those many years of trying to do this stuff. And I'll caveat that with, and Patrick Morgan, we were having a chat earlier. I'll caveat that by saying that we all have different ways of doing things. And we all sit in different spaces in life and we have different roles to play. I'm going to just share some of my insight from my perspective. That doesn't mean that that's the only way and that's the way that you have to do what you're doing. I think it's really important that you find your own ways to drive that change. But hopefully what I can share today are some lessons that I've learned, and hopefully you can build on that and you can take that and interpret it in the way that works for you. I forgot to say, it's also really weird sitting at this end of the table. And apologies, hopefully you guys can see all right. It's just very funny to be sat down and presenting from the top of the table. Does anyone know where this is? Or what this is? In the room? It is a roundabout. It is a real roundabout, which is the most alarming thing. It is in the UK, it's Britain. It is in the sunny town of Swindon. It is the magic roundabout in Swindon. And it is a real and somewhat functioning roundabout in the UK. And the reason I always show the magic roundabout, this is like a potted history of where I've been and what I've done. And I guess my point of showing the roundabout is that sustainability is broad, change is broad, transformation is broad. There is no one pathway to get to where we are. This is my pathway. There are lots of others. So in a potted history sense, I'm a scientist by background, so apologies. I talk funny about science stuff often. But I did a straight science degree at undergrad. Had this really funny epiphany moment. I actually did natural sciences and then had a placement year as an environmental consultant. Never had thought about doing environmental science, hadn't seen it as a career, didn't know a lot about it. I actually, as a kid, was not a big green, person. But found this really interesting consultancy and thought, that's interesting. That's super fun. Went back to uni and did a final year, picked up some more papers focused on environmental science, and actually did one that looked at Aboriginal Australian perspectives on water. So as I said in my mihi, some of you may have picked up, I grew up in Birmingham in the UK. Birmingham is not the most, wasn't anyway in the 1980s, the most connected with the natural world. Indigenous perspectives were like, the Welsh are over there. That's really interesting. So it was this really weird and interesting environment for me. And I was really keen to pick up and find out more about that, which led me all the way over here to Aotearoa, New Zealand, to do my master's in environmental science, where I did a thesis on sustainable cultural heritage tourism with Ngāi Tāmaki, one of the mana whenua of Tāmaki Makaurau. And that was fascinating. And it really opened my eyes to thinking about the environment, our interaction with the environment, people's interaction with the environment in a very different way. and it was fun. But then I kind of went into consultancy, and a lot of that kind of wasn't. This was 2005. You know, you remember New Zealand of 2005. Really wasn't a place as accepting the business world at least was really not engaged. So I kind of treaded that path, consulted, did a whole bunch of stuff as the highlights. Ended up back here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, still consulting, and then about jeepers, that's a long time ago. Oh, really? That long ago, I joined Auckland Council. Can't be my sons. And that was my first interaction with cities and city shaping and how important cities are to people and businesses, and got really excited by that. And that's kind of been a bit of a journey that I've been on for the last 7-ish years at council initially, where I joined actually thinking about corporate sustainability. So not the urban development stuff. It was literally, hey, we've got an Auckland plan, or we're building an Auckland plan. How do we make sure the organisation is structured in a way that can deliver on that we're actually walking the talk? That was my role. And then eventually became the acting chief sustainability officer, which had more of that front-facing role, which is where I think we met Thomas. And it was really interesting for me about cities, and not just, you know, what they are, but how businesses have a really important role to play in cities and communities, and how that all functions. So that's actually a relatively recent thing that's been fun. Started lecturing at AET, so some of the slides that you'll see today are part of that lecturing that I do. It's super fun. I lecture management students on sustainable business, and I talk organisational psychology and mental models, and they freak out because I'm not entirely sure why I'm talking about that stuff. But as you'll hear, for me, that's critical. That's the bit that underpins everything that we're doing, understanding how organisations tick, how people tick. If we don't do that, we don't get that enduring change. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Then 2 years at Kāinga, I see a few Kāinga whānau on the line. Super fun days. I'll talk a little about some of the insights from there and from Te Kaunihera to Amaki Makaurau. And then very recently, like May last year, joined KPMG and may talk about that, but I won't dwell too much on that. I forgot to play this. This is it moving. It's quite funny. So there are 5 roundabouts around a big roundabout, which makes it a massive roundabout. And in some way, it actually works because people go around this roundabout in all kinds of ways. You can pick your own pathway. This is why I think it's so terrible, but also so good to think about how we get to where we get to. And so you can do different pathways to get to the same point. Doesn't really matter. Everyone kind of moves around it in whatever way. And apparently this was saying that they have very few accidents. I can't believe that. But there you go. So the point here is that we'll all tread our different paths, and no path is right, because actually I feel like every experience that you have enriches the path that you take. So yeah, Google it. It's funny. So I'll start a little bit, also already going off time, with a question that I get asked a lot, and apologies for those of you who've seen this slide before, but I think it's really important to kind of set that context. I get asked often, what does sustainability mean for you, from all kinds of directions, from like students that I've talked to really senior folk in businesses. What does it mean? And for me, and this underpins everything that I do, is that for me, sustainability isn't about like triple bottom lines, quadruple bottom lines. It's not about integrated reports. It's not about, you know, climate reduction plans or whatever it is. For me, sustainability is fundamentally about making better decisions. That's it. And that's what we're talking about. And when I say better decisions, I mean making decisions that take a longer term view, that consider a broader range of factors, and that importantly for us right now is that they acknowledge and confront complexity. And so I kind of have couched this, and some of you, again, sorry, apologies, you'll have seen this, but I like to visualize these things, and this has really helped trying to visualize this to a whole bunch of folk. I think Ferran, I think I saw your name online, and I've presented this to the guys at Fletcher as well, which has been good fun. So fundamentally, what I try and articulate is that our life, our world is all made of making decisions. We make decisions every day. We make big decisions at council. We make little decisions about how we get around the place. And we make that decision with the current context in mind often. So there's a decision point and we look at the world around us. The problem with that is that by the time that decision is actioned, and importantly, by the time the effects of that decision materialize, that world has changed. So we think about building a road, like you make a decision that you're going to build a road or whatever it is, and then by the time you say, actually, yeah, we'll build that road or we'll do whatever, the world's changed. And then by the time the road is built, the world is completely different as well. So when we're thinking about decision making, we can't just rely on the current context of the world around us. We have to think about what might the world look like in the future. The problem is, obviously, that world is massively, could do a whole bunch of different directions, could eventuate in a whole different number of worlds. And that's really important. I'll come back to some of the scenario work that we're doing. Actually, Matt, you'll appreciate that in terms of some of the work that's going on in the corporate world around scenario analysis. So it could be lots of different things, right? And that's challenging. But it's important that we think about what it might look like, because what we know is that it won't be what it currently is. And so I think that's a really important thing to take to our decisions. One thing, though, that is increasingly interesting and important to recognise, and I think the experiences of working with mana whenua and looking at the world through a more Indigenous perspective, is that we can take cues from what the world has been. Like, we can look backwards, classic kind of whakatauki, we can look backwards to have a view of what the world might look like in the future. Increasingly important as we think about climate change, those actually, I was going to say those of you in Auckland, maybe there's some people in Auckland, but those of you who may have heard or experienced the floods of Tāmaki Makaurau will know that of last year, will have got an insight that the places that flooded were like the Waitakares and Wairoa, and every place that was named Wai flooded because Māori knew that they were places where water wanted to be. And so it's really important that we think about that localized context in a whole bunch of ways, but importantly as we think about climate change and what resilience looks like and all that kind of stuff. So that's number one, is taking that longer term view, but looking backwards as well. The second one is thinking about a broader range of factors, which is kind of your classic where we think about sustainability. We have thought about sustainability, think about economic benefits, socio-cultural benefits, and environmental benefits. But importantly, again, think about how those aspects change over time and making sure that we don't pick a solution or we don't pick an answer on the basis of what we think the current benefits are, but we actually try and project out what those benefits may look like in the future. And that thing that you thought was fantastically brilliant from a financial perspective actually is terrible going forward. So that's really important to kind of think of those broader range of factors. This is those of you who are the more academic amongst you will know, and I'll talk about this later as well, that we have evolved from a world where we think about sustainability as this model on the left-hand side of that chart about the intersection point. Sustainability is that middle point where we balance environmental, social, and economic factors, to the nested dependencies model on the right-hand side that you see, which says, actually, my colours are right. Without a healthy functioning environment, we have no society, we have no people. Without people, there is no need for an economy. And that's the hierarchy that we're living in. That's the reality. So it's important to consider that broader range of factors. And the last one, which is really critical as we face up to lots of complexity, lots of uncertainty, increasing amounts of uncertainty, is that we need to front up to that. We can't ignore it. We can't pretend it's not happening. And the way I explain this is, we have our decision point, the circle. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on around us. They shift and change over time. So if we don't think about all those things that are happening, what may happen or what may eventuate is that triangle that we'd ignored actually comes along and obliterates our decision in the first place, right? So it makes it completely redundant. So it's really important that we think about what else is going on around us so that we can actually think about what may come along in the future. And it's hard and it's challenging. And actually, again, this is terrible. I'm thinking about stuff that I put in the slides, and I'm just going to spoil the story. But importantly, as we're thinking about that complexity amongst us, one of the key things that I've talked about within organisations, I think Jenny, you're on the line, Kāinga, I used to talk about this, is the maturity of the people in our organisations. How do we help people make decisions in that world of complexity, right? And that's an important skill set, important familiarity and comfort around that we need to be building amongst our teams, amongst our organisations, because it's a skill that we're all going to need going forward. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of like how I like to frame sustainability, some of the things that I try and talk about and kind of move along. Any quick questions? Or are we all good? Otherwise, I'll charge. I'll keep running. I think there's some stuff on the chat. So if you want to pop any questions in, then feel free to drop those in. Current state of play. So there's lots out there. I just wanted to flag. I won't dwell on this too long. Sorry, this red button keeps drawing me to press it, and it's actually the microphone. Wrong one. I just want to flag this, and Jace, thanks so much for the work that you guys did at Kantar. It's a report that you can find on our website. it's a really, the genesis of this is perhaps as interesting as the content of it. We talked to Jason, the Kantar team, about doing some work for KPMG. We really wanted to understand what our role was to play in the sustainability world. They went out, interviewed a bunch of folk that we wanted them to talk to, some senior folk in business, as well as sustainability leaders, to try and understand fundamentally, how could we help them, but generally, how could consultancy work? And what we found was some really interesting stuff. So we actually rejigged it and we said, look, this is so interesting and so important. This needs to go out to the general public. So we've published it now. We've taken a few of the bits out that talk specifically about KPMG because you don't want to know that. But it's really interesting. It's not a long report. I'd encourage you to go and have a look at it because it provides some really good insights. I'm just going to look at two slides from two bits from the report. One, and they're both the preamble, which talk about how sustainability is evolve over time. And this slide effectively talks, sorry, there's quite a few words in this now I've looked at it. And there's two frameworks that Jason and the team kind of drew out of the interviews that they had. And one which those of you who worked in sustainability will recognize is there's evolving maturity within organizations, evolving place and impetus from which sustainability plays. From being, when I started, you're a actually you're not a sustainability manager, you're an environmental practitioner, you're here to get us some permits and some consents, and that's pretty much it. Just tick some boxes for us. All the way through to actually where we're seeing some, more, not all, definitely, organizations where sustainability is core part of governance, core part of good decision making. You've got sustainability leads sitting at the exec level, you have sustainability champions at the board level, and it's really highly integrated. And so there's an evolution there, and the argument being that if we're genuinely going to see transformation, we need more and more people on that right-hand side influencing change, and more people in more and more organizations pushing different levers amongst the whole system that we're playing at. Importantly, and I just highlight this bit at the bottom because it was a bit of a light bulb moment for us, or for me at least, that what I've enjoyed about the transition to KPMG is that we talk a lot at the governance level, which is really, really important, right? The interviews that Jace and the team held highlighted that in that governance level, that business transformation is a values-based decision. So it's fundamentally reliant on individuals with strong values driving the agenda. It is not yet, the business case has not been articulated sufficiently well to drive the action that we need. My view is the business case is there, we just haven't articulated well enough. And so it's reliant on values to drive the change, more than a commercial one to this point. And the role of a chairperson and champion is increasingly the driving force behind change, which on the one hand is great because we are seeing change. On the other hand, it's reliant on that individual. If that individual changes or gets tired fundamentally, because they do, then things start to draw away. So it's a really interesting insight here about the current state and where it needs to shift and change. The other one that I'll pull to is the framing of progress towards sustainable transformation. And this is important. So there's a distinction here to be drawn between doing stuff on sustainability, climate change, and understanding and driving the transformation that's required from businesses, from all organizations, from society at large. And that we are still very much heavily on that reporting compliance level, not quite in that changing the way to do business. Like I said, but I just wanted to flag those. I'd really encourage you to go and have a look. I'm happy to share the link if it makes it easier. Actually, it will make it easier because our website is terrible to navigate. Which leads me on to this, and this is one of the things that I kind of really simply put up there for my students, but I think it's a really important aspect because I often get asked, where are we? Where are businesses in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and globally? And we have this continuum of interventions, right? And it goes from the left of just reducing our impact to the right of rethinking our business model. And we need to get further to the right, fundamentally. We are still very much on the left. Even though there are many of us in the room and there are many in other places that recognize that we need to go further right, the reality is that we're still left. So a key thing is, how do we push ourselves to the right? There's some I didn't put this in because you were here. This was already in the slides. Patrick, we were talking earlier about a really important piece of regulation that happened a couple of years ago now, which is mandatory climate disclosures. We're starting to see companies across New Zealand having to disclose climate statements that articulate their risks, climate risks and opportunities. It has been touted as the most important climate legislation, much more important than the Zero Carbon Act, actually, because it actually requires businesses to do something. And so the heart of this piece of legislation, and I won't bore you, I'm happy to talk about it afterwards, is the scenario work that needs to happen to underpin that risk and opportunity. So in a nutshell, really dumbing it down, sorry, Matt, is, as an organization, you have to think about what your risks, climate risks and opportunities are. The scenario analysis that happens is intended to make you think about the world is going to be radically different in the future. So those risks and opportunities that you identify are not just the ones that you've identified now. You have to think about what the world looks like and what your business looks like in the future. And interestingly, so the snapshots I pulled out here and highlighted in red, sorry for those of you online if you can't read, actually sorry for you in the room, you probably can't read it either. The left-hand side is the Financial Markets Authority. So the financial regulator of New Zealand, like, hopefully we don't have any FMA people in here, but like the really boffiny guys, really technical guys. And the bit highlighted in red talks about these scenarios need to be challenging. You need challenging but plausible futures that you place your business in. And the bit that I've highlighted says, to be challenging, assumptions should confront conventional wisdom and simplistic understandings of today's environment. When thinking about the major sources of uncertainty, scenarios should explore assumptions that will significantly alter the basis for business as usual thinking. That's the intent of these scenarios. They are meant to challenge you. We are starting to see the first ones come through, like being, well, actually some were voluntarily published previously, but we're starting to see the ones that are coming through. And the challenge I throw out there, and the challenge that we all throw out there is, are they sufficiently challenging? Are we really pushing hard enough? Our business is thinking really hard enough about what the future looks like and how do we transform? Is your business still viable in the future? So I'm really interested in how this pans out. There is a risk that it just becomes another compliance tick. Oh yes, I've done my scenarios, my risks and opportunities. Yeah, they seem about similar to what, and we haven't pushed hard enough. So it's going to be really interesting. I think we're all keeping a really watchful eye on what comes out and how we may get to that point of sorry, I have to, I'll bugger just language moment that we need to get to for businesses. The bit on the right hand side is from the actuaries of the UK. So again, not the radical transformers of the world. And so this is a really interesting publication that talks about climate scenarios from the actuarial community. And fundamentally, again, the bits that I've highlighted just reiterate their view that some of these scenarios don't go far enough. So fundamental is what it says. And some of these scenarios, even those that are trying to project some of the more likely but extreme scenarios, are underestimating how much impact we're going to see. So it's going to be interesting how this pans out and how this helps us shift to that right-hand side of the spectrum to business transformation. The stick is there. It's like how or the incentive stick, carrot, one or the other. It's there to push us that far, but it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. A few more things, and just a couple of concepts that I find really important as I've kind of gone on this journey, and that I'll throw out there and you can use as you want or whatever. Often in business, we have this balance, or we have a drive for efficiency. We need to be more efficient. We have to do more. And I think it's really important to throw out this diagram that there's a paper that it comes out of. And without kind of overcomplicating it, effectively what this image says is, if you go further to the left of this graph, you get more efficient. But to be more efficient, you have fewer and fewer pathways. Fundamentally, if you think about efficiency, you're streamlining, you have fewer different things that could go wrong. But that means your ecosystem becomes more brittle. You are more vulnerable to change. You are more vulnerable to disruption. If you go to the other side, you become more resilient. You have lots of different pathways. You can apply this in all different ways, supply chains, business operations, all that kind of stuff. If you go further to the right, yes, you're more resilient, but actually you're not really very efficient. There's a lot of wastage and so on. So what we have to do as we're fighting this balance between resilience and efficiency is find that what Bernard terms the window of viability, where you've got the optimal balance. And actually that's what you see in ecosystems. They find that balance. And so it's important that we find a balance here in everything that we do, that we understand we need to be more efficient, because efficiency is where you reduce wastage, but we can't be too efficient that we lose our resilience, particularly as we think about that complexity that I highlighted. So I find this a really important kind of visual metaphor to kind of draw through. The other one, which some of you will have seen, is this concept of regeneration and sustainability. And without going into lots of detail, I think we have, I mean, semantics are amazing, but we have latched onto sustainability and we think that that's sufficient, but we know that it isn't. And sustaining our current balance is not going to happen as we have a growing world and we have depleting planetary resources. And the importance of actually moving right and understanding what we mean by regeneration. So these are, I mean, we throw terms around and that's our want, but I think it's always really important to try and understand what we're saying here. So yeah, so really important that we don't just hold on to sustainability, we actually think about regeneration, we move towards that right-hand side. And as I said earlier, that no planet, no environment, no economy is a critical part of that. And so that nested dependencies model, and we know from end of last year, those planetary boundaries that we have exceeding, 6 of the 9. And there was a localized version of this that MFE did not long ago, which painted a similarly dire picture. So those are just 3 things that I try and hold front of mind as I'm thinking about sustainability and change. So a few lessons before I kind of open up. Driving sustainability. People, can't reiterate that enough. People are the core of this. Just to highlight, when I was at council, I think I saw some council names, which is fun. This was a framework that I drew up early on at my time at council. And what's important is, this was the corporate sustainability framework that I highlighted, and 2 of the 3 are about the people in the organisation. One is about embedding sustainability thinking in all our decision making. You can hear where some of these themes come through from. And the other is engaging our people, so they feel empowered to make decisions and they feel like they have the skills, they're armed with the capabilities to make these decisions in an increasingly complex world. Similarly, at Kāinga, the top bit was what we had and some fantastic work that the team had done before I even joined the organisation, that sustainability framework that underpinned the work that we've been doing. The bottom bit was the stuff that I added in terms of like, how do we get there then? Bunch of stuff around issues and opportunities. We had some fantastic opportunities in that urban development, which I thought was really important to call out. But fundamentally maturing the organisation was really important. It's all well and good having pilots, fantastic pilots, which I love. I think, Jenny, you're on the line, some really cool stuff around renewables, some really awesome stuff around urban ngāhere. But if they're just standalone projects and we don't embed that into the thinking and the DNA of the organisation, we don't allow the organisation to do that, then they're just going to be one-offs and we're not going to actually reap the benefits of that really, really important work. So maturing the organisation, there's an evolution of language. So for me, as I found my way through, the importance of maturity and decision-making has become really, really important. And just to highlight, like, this was a slide that I put together for a leaders forum, a Kāinga leaders forum, and I kind of challenged our leaders at Kāinga to rethink what we do, how we do it, and how we lead our organisation. Very simply, talked about the work that we do, how we do that work, and then fundamentally, how do we lead our organisation? And just try to give people some prompts, right? Some prompts about, when we're doing a task, can we do this task differently? Can we do it with fewer impacts? Can we reshape the project so that we actually increase benefits? Don't talk about reducing benefits. And fundamentally, do we need to do this work? Always the greatest way to find sustainability benefits. Do we actually need to do this? How do we do that work? The ways of working, how we're moving around, the resources we need to, all that kind of stuff is really important. But then fundamentally, that leadership bit is so critical. Like, so many people have systems that they lead. There might be the procurement system, it may be the decision IDE, investment delivery kind of stuff. So if you're in charge of a system, does it support the climate outcomes that we're trying to see. You know, it's not just about, and you know, I think actually Thomas, you would. When you came up, we were talking a little about the climate impact statements that we did at council, and it's great. It's a climate impact statement. It's a useful tool, but it probably didn't do what it was meant to do, because people would just come and ask the sustainability office, what are the climate impacts of this thing that we're doing, rather than actually thinking about what the climate impacts are. So individual systems that deal with climate change or whatever sustainability issue that you're trying to do, they're good. They allow some prompts, but the goal is to embed all that into your existing systems, right? Because that's where every decision goes through. Procurement systems, pretty much every decision goes through some sort of procurement system. So let's make sure that that holds the climate considerations or sustainability considerations in there. Looking at risks and opportunities. Importantly, on the top right-hand side here, and it's often a question that, not a question. It's I guess a challenge that I throw out here. Do your teams recognise that they can drive positive climate impacts? You get that question. I'm sure, Matt, you get this question a lot. What's the most important thing I can do for climate change? Is it riding a bike? Is it eating less meat? Whatnot? They're all amazing stuff. But think about the work that you do at work, and that's probably going to be more impactful, probably, right? And how do you embed positive outcomes in the work that you're doing? And then, from a leader's perspective, do you empower your teams and encourage them to do that? Do you give them the mandate to actually think laterally about this stuff? So it's really important that we do those kinds of things. So that was just something that we threw around, which was fairly well received, I think. But people, and this is what Frida, Patrick, we were talking about earlier. People make decisions all the time. People have perspectives, and some of you have seen this kind of iceberg version of systems thinking. And you see these events happen. You see the decisions that someone's made. You see the GPS transport or whatever, and you get disheartened, or you go, "Why have they done that?" And it's really important that we try and unpick why that's happened, right? What are the patterns or trends, what are the structures, and importantly, what are the mental models that are driving these decisions, right? And let's unpick that, and let's tackle that, because that's how we're going to get enduring change. We could get change by tackling that thing at the top, and we may push it back, but unless we get to that bottom of the iceberg, it's not going to endure, it's not going to last. So it's really important that in some way, in whichever way we can, we try and understand why these decisions are being made and why people are reaching the conclusions that they are. I try and hold this belief that people don't make the decisions because they're being intentionally trying to destroy the world that we live on. I can't bring myself to think that. So I have to go, well, there is something in that mental model. There is something either they're thinking or in the structures around them that are driving it. So we've got to change that if we're going to get that shift. So fundamentally, what are the organizational personal settings that are driving those behaviors, and how do you go about shifting them? And the first thing is trying to understand that before you even shift it. How do you understand it? And so thinking about organizational structures, one of my big lessons actually from Auckland Council was hilarious, somewhat, if you look in retrospect. I realize I monologue when I do this way. Is I got asked when I walked into council 8 years ago, oh, so are you going to come and draw up an environmental sustainability policy? And I was like, no, why would I waste my time doing that? That's ridiculous. That's just a piece of paper. Because I'd never worked in local government before, right? And then over time, I realized that in an organization like a council, those rules, those decisions, those councils, they're gold, right? They're really important, and they drive the way that an organization works. There's a really interesting, if you haven't seen it before, there's a way of thinking about it. It's called spiral dynamics. It's really interesting. I don't have time to go into it, but it's interesting. It's a bit horoscopy. It's like all horoscopes. It's kind of like you can pull things through. But what's interesting about spiral dynamics is it talks about the evolution of organizations as well, and how they go through phases of entrepreneurialism where there's no rules, through to very rules oriented, and they kind of oscillate between the two. And so understanding where your organization is on that spectrum allows you to think about interventions that you can put in place to try and shift and change that. So think about culture that you're setting, norms, expectations. Targets are critical, right? We actually I've just come out of a 2-day partner conference for KPMG, and we talked about, how do we get different, more collaborative behaviors? How do we get these kind of behaviors? It's all about the targets that you're measuring against. If you measure for certain things, you'll get a certain outcome. If you want a different outcome, you've got to think about what you're measuring and what the targets you're setting. So targets are critical. Think about those organizational structures. This is something that some of you will have seen that I kind of drew up just as I was leaving council, I think, about transformational change and some of the kind of takeaways for me. And what it does is it starts on this top left hand of the yellow box. Hopefully you might be able to see my arrow. And for me, if we want to get transformational change, you want to shift the balance of interest and activity amongst the people. This is a little bit thinking about general system change. And actually, if you look at some studies of where people are, there's a lot of people who are disengaged around climate change, and then there's like this inverted pyramid of cautious concern, and then a few are really, really alarmed. And what we have to do is we have to try and shift that pyramid so that there's actually so two things. So we invert that pyramid, and that pyramid may be real or it may be perceived. Is the other point, right? That I'll put there. And I don't know. I'll talk on behalf of you, Thomas. Like as my view of the political world is that if you see a world that's pushing towards a certain direction, then it's really hard to push against it. But what we know is that actually there are lots of people who are really concerned about climate change, and to make it a visible invert, right? So there's comfort around it. So fundamentally, we need to invert that pyramid so that actually we have a lot more people who sit in that alarm, visibly sit in that alarmed and concerned, right? And I think that's the point, visibly. So that gives you the constituency, so we need to invert that pyramid, but we can only invert that pyramid if we increase awareness of both the why, which we're great at. Why do we need to do that? But the what. What are we doing? What are the things that I can do? How can I do it? So it's really important to have both. We often focus on one or the other, but it's really important for people to have both. Like, it's really important, but what can I do about it? What's the important stuff? And all of that drives the constituency, drives and builds pressure on the politics necessary for change. We have to recognize there are other interests and influences as well that we need to try and deal with. Okay. And so that was just a little model that I found that was a bit of a reflection of my time in the local government arena anyway. And again, fundamentally about that people bit. How do we invert that pyramid? And we use this, some of you will know, while I was at Auckland Council, we had Te Tariki Tāwhiri. We set the regional climate plan. And a key part of the decision making, and I mean, if you talk to Richard Hills and others, we did a piece of research with Colmar Brunton, as it was then, where we polled a whole bunch of people the public about their perceptions. And we wanted to do that because, as you all know, consultations don't often get a representative sample. We wanted to get a better representative sample, and we went out and polled people. And sorry, you can't read this, I don't think. But one of the questions was, how much change do Aucklanders think we need to make? So I'll move my cursor over here. And on the red, no change was about 90%. Sorry, I can't even read them. 36% said medium change, and 42% of Auckland said we need more radical change, right? There was an interesting split of where those people sit demographically. And then the second question we asked, which was really important, was how much change are you willing to make? And what we came up with, like 82% of people in Auckland were willing to make change, and 40-something% were willing to make radical change. Now, the question that we got asked as officers, is a good question, is like, what do people mean by radical change? Which is a really good question, right? So people have different perspectives of what radical change is. But those two statistics were really important as we came through the decision making for Te Tariki Tāwhiri. What was also really important as we came through decision making was it coincided with some of the early climate strikes, which gave the decision makers of the day a really visible, this is what's happening. The follow-on question from Aucklanders willing to make changes, are they willing to pay for it? Which was the LTP discussion that happened a couple of years later, where a similar exercise happened, and it came out that the majority of Aucklanders actually were willing to pay more to address climate change. There's some really interesting bits about that which I don't have time to go into, which like fold into the what do we mean by climate change action and what do people think. But that polling was critical, right, for us to get the climate plan across the line, or more easily get it across the line. So people are critical. Shifting behaviours is really important, and a bunch of words throughout there. I mean, I've talked about building maturity and ability to kind of make decisions. Communication is obviously really important, but with Patrick, we were talking earlier. Communication is one thing. Is like, where do people get that's terrible English. Who are people listening to? So communication is one thing, getting your message out, but needing to have a variety of different voices saying this, because everyone is different, and so they're all listening to different people. And I used to talk to my councillors and say, look, it's all well and good me going out there and doing presentations about climate change, but I'm chief sustainability officer. But it's more powerful if you're doing it, because you're representing your community. So, you know, you go out there, they're hearing it from you, and a range of other voices in their community. You know, let's find those voices that people are listening to, and let's get them, comfortable and armed with an ability to communicate. And then there's this great thing around influence and persuasion. I'm pretty sure most of you will have heard those two terms and probably use them interchangeably, but it's really important to recognize they're different. So persuasion is presenting a case in such a way as to sway the opinion of others and make people believe certain information or motivate a decision. And we persuade people all the time. And this is a slide from my ET course. Like, there's lots of stuff around the business case for sustainability that we can try and persuade people to do things. And that's important, right? That's really important. But persuasion often is temporary. And so it's really, important thing about influence and having this vision of an optimal outcome for a situation without using force or coercion. So how are we painting a picture that people are drawn to, that they want to go there, they understand this is the right path? And that is a much more powerful and much more long-term way of effecting that change. And so I think it's really important that we think about, are we using persuasion or are we trying to use influence? And influence also comes with positions, and it also comes with that point about who are you listening to and who's giving you the message. So just a really important distinction that I found over time. Like, we can do business cases important, all that kind of stuff. They're effective, but we also need to think about that influence side as well. How do we use that?
Alec, I'm just going to interrupt to slightly influence the proceedings this morning around timing. We've got like 10 minutes left.
Oh, sure.
Around about from the time that we said we were going to run, but we could run for longer if people want to stay. But if people do need to leave at 11:30 as advertised, don't feel rude to do so. Yep. And likewise online, if you need to leave, you can drop off in an easy way. No one will notice.
Apologies, so, rabbit.
But no, it's great stuff, and I think we're all really
okay.
But so that's we'll get questions from the chat, and we'll try to get through those, and then in the room as well. So maybe we run. What time do you have to leave, Alec?
I've got time until
So maybe we'll run until about 10 to 12 or something like that.
And we'll wrap up. I'll try and run through these a little bit, and apologies, I talk too much. So that's a bit about the change and the people side of things and influencing and whatnot. These are a few more words that kind of resonate with me. Has anyone come across the term WIFM? WIFM. Can anyone guess? Not online. Well, thumb up on WIFM. WIFM. What's in it for me? What is in it for me? And so, again, going back to the iceberg, the mental models, why are people doing what they're doing? And then when you're trying to ask someone to do something differently, what's in it for me? Personally and organizationally. Okay? So thinking about drivers of them as individuals, but also drivers for the organization. This is something, that I think is applicable for city shaping, planning, whatnot, really applicable for business. It's like, how's the alignment with your strategy and all that kind of stuff? How does this help me deliver on my goals? All that kind of stuff. So really trying to think about what it is that you're trying to do, how are you trying, where are you trying to get to? And often you're trying to get someone to do things differently, either by persuasion or influence. And it's really important to kind of try and think through, well, how do I couch this in a way that deals with that with him? Because that's innate. Everyone, has this inherent, like, what do I get out of it kind of thing, unfortunately. And try and think through, what are those drivers? What are those things that people hold dear and true? So with him is important to think about and to try and articulate. And sometimes you'll find it, sometimes you won't, but it's really important to recognize that there probably is that element in there as you're talking to folk. The other thing that I think is really important is teamwork, thinking about, like, and again, I haven't done half of the stuff that people talk about myself. There have been fantastic people around me like really, really amazing people around me who have a whole bunch of strengths that I lean on heavily, technical skills, people skills. Importantly, you don't always resonate with other people. So who else can deliver that message in a way that resonates better? It's so important. They have different relationships. They fundamentally have time to do this kind of stuff. So that teamwork is so critical, and thinking about, roles of influence. Like influence comes in lots of different ways. Hey, I'm reaching a bit of a blocker. They're not resonating with me, and that's another word I'll come back to, resonance. My attempts to talk about something isn't resonating, and so maybe you need to find someone from a different position in the organization or a different role. Sorry, I'm waving my arms around, hopefully you guys can see online. So that's important. So you bring those people into your team to help you drive that change. So teamwork's critical for everything that we're doing, and like I said, I've been lucky to have been part of some amazing teams that have allowed us to kind of achieve some fantastic outcomes. And then the last word there is timing, and timing is so important, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because there's urgency against us, but we have to recognize that there are sometimes good times to deal with something and to tackle an issue, and there are bad times to tackle an issue. Does anyone know what Newton's third law is? This is my science geek coming through. My view of it, Newton's third law, is every action has an equal opposite reaction, which I kind of think is somewhat similar. So the reason I throw that there is when you come up against a brick wall or you come up against some opposition, the harder you push against it, the harder it will push back, fundamentally. And so it's really important to recognize that. And I'm not saying don't do that, but it's really important to recognize that will happen. And we see this all the time when we're trying to affect change. If you push against someone, they just retrench and they're like, oh, no, I don't. And that's a kind of a natural reaction that happens, right? So to the iceberg model, rather than continue to push, let's try and understand why that resistance is happening. And if we can understand that resistance, then maybe we have a hope of trying to change those underpinning factors. So it's really important to think about that. And that those resistance points might be a timing thing. It's not right now. On the flip side, it may be really, really a good time to do something. So two examples that I'll throw out there is when I was at Auckland Council, we issued the first domestic green bond. And it wasn't actually, the team prior to me joining had been trying to do this for ages. I just happened to do that at the right time when a number of factors came through. They were looking at diversifying their investor base, whole bunch of stuff, really supportive CFO, good timing. Let's push hard. It wasn't because it hadn't been thought about. It was just happened to be a good time. I don't know if Jenny's still on, but at Kāinga, we were about to embark on a bunch of work around climate risks, and then the flooding happened. Fantastic time to really push hard on that, and the realization within the firm that we need to go further on that. So timing is really important, finding good times to do things, and recognizing that there will be bad times. So, you risk, if you push too hard on things, you risk like really either alienating people that don't need to be alienated. Some people need to be alienated, some people don't. And so it's really important to think about timing and what's good timing for you. So just some things there. I'll just pause. I don't think I've got this. I mentioned resonance, and this probably falls more in that communication bit. It's so important that when we're thinking about change and trying to affect change, that we find ways that will resonate with people. And to do that, you need to try and understand them as individuals. So lots of different ways of doing it, but resonance is one of the most critical things. Just a couple of things. Throw that. And I guess this is more of a personal learning and a call out to those of you who are sitting in these roles that are probably really tired and drained, is prioritization is really important, right? You can't do everything at the same time. And part of that is kind of this whole cacophony of factors to think about, like materiality. What's the most important thing that we need to deal with? And it may be really important because it opens up doors, right? It might not just be that it's a really highly impactful thing. It just may be really material because it allows you access to people, or it allows you to talk about a certain topic with individuals that will help you break those icebergs. So thinking about what's important, thinking about timing, when is a good time, thinking about like what's in it for me, both like it's a good time to do something or it's a bad time to do it. Do I have the team around me? All those things you need to throw around to go, what are the bits that I want to push hard on? Because if we try and push hard on everything, we're just going to fall over and we're just going to get too tired. So it's just a general plea, because this is really tough stuff. And I know I've been tired. I've been burnt out many times because I haven't quite got this right. And it's really important that we try and find ways to reduce that and try and reach out to other people when we do that. I think that's hopefully that's been useful. But yeah, it sounds like there are some questions.
Thank you so much. So I've noticed your tech wizardry. So if you do want to scan through the Q&A, making my job easier, there are about 4 or 5 questions, so we can just
Okay, right.
That sounds
good. Oh yeah, actuaries. Why are actuaries important? Yeah, wow, that's a great question, Catherine. I don't think, Catherine, you're an actuary, are you? I don't think you are. But look, I find it, and probably actuaries. Oh look, do we have any actuaries in the room? I'm not going to offend any actuaries or online. Look, I'll be a little bit more generic. The finance world is critical. Yeah, fundamentally, the finance world. I learned this at the end of my time at ERM. I did a stint at New Zealand Super Fund, and the numbers that were flying around just blew my mind. And that was a point of. Sorry, thanks, Catherine. There was a point of realization for me that the finance world is really important, and it drives a lot of decisions fundamentally. And we need to use that. And there's a really, sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but it's really important to recognize, and I'm sure many of you do, that one of the parts of that iceberg is the current system that we work in, which is a hugely capitalist, hugely finance-driven world that we live in. And we know that that isn't viable or sustainable in the long term. But we also know that that's the world that we're playing in. So we have to play in that world. And so as we are seeing financial folk really getting and understanding this, that's really important. Right. And so it's been fun to kind of see the finance world go, oh my God, all of our assets are at risk. How are we going to better understand that? And so we use that, and actuaries are like the most conservative part of it. And so to see them get alarmed at the lack of reality in some of these scenarios is like quite a impactful statement to be able to make. And the reason I couch that in, like, we use that, and then we need to turn that into what the new way of looking at the sector looks like. Because again, it's kind of like this whole, if you can use this, and this is a really challenging mindset, I know, for many folk. Like, and this goes to my point about incremental, like, shifts and changes don't give us the urgency that we require. But my view is give us the longevity of a change, right? And we've seen that more recently. If we think about COVID, switch, and actually a lot of those behaviours that we thought were embedded actually fall away really quickly because it was sudden and urgent and all that kind of stuff. So that's why, for me, the fact that we've got the finance world thinking about this, and then the actuaries on top of that, who are like just facts, give me facts. Sorry, any actuaries in the room, or watching the recording. I've made an enemy in the actuary community. So hopefully that answers your question, Catherine. Mark. Could you talk a little about the risks, roadblocks, and opportunities in combining nature and climate-related analysis, planning and responses, and supporting the required transformation? So, briefly, I'll say 2 things, and then Mark will have a beer about it. So, those of you who are aware or not aware, so climate change risk disclosure has been emergent over a number of years, and it's driving those outcomes that I talked about. Nature is just starting. Like, nature risks and opportunities is starting to be a thing that's come through again through the financial investor world, and people understanding that whole no environment, no economy, or fundamentals. So that's coming through, and it has come through fairly recently in terms of the focus. The challenge we're currently facing, which Mark's alluding to, is that a lot of folk, you can imagine, are like, oh my God, what's this climate thing that we're having to deal with? How am I going to get to grips with that? And now we throw on nature as well. And nature is so much more complicated and complex than climate change. I used to do a bunch of stuff, Frida highlighted, in the water space, and I used to do water footprinting, and I used to kind of articulate, a ton of carbon is a ton of carbon is a ton of carbon. A litre of water in the Waikato is different from a litre of water in the Thames, is different to a litre of water in the Ganges. For like cultural reasons, for economic reasons, for all kinds of reasons, it's different. And that's just water. And then you overlay nature, and the localizer. So it's a complicated arena, but it's a critical one to get to. If we go back to that no planet, no environment, no economy, it's really critical that we get to that point. So we're in a really interesting phase at the moment where climate disclosures is kind of kicking in, which is great. And we're trying to go, well, don't forget that this leads you to nature, and let's do this at the same time. So there's a little bit of a bandwidth challenge, Mark, and a little bit of a storytelling challenge where we need to not, I guess, it's that almost that some of the stuff I talked about, to recognize where people are mindset wise and try and help them push through that in the nature, because actually that integrated nature climate scenarios, planning, analysis, that's where we get to, particularly in Aotearoa New Zealand, particularly here. If we think about the kinds of businesses, the kind of work that we do, nature is critical.